We are now live.
Sí, lo sé. Venimos de la naturaleza.
Nous venons de la nature.
Pero nuestros problemas
Mais nos problèmes
vienen de nosotros.
viennent
Algunos pueden
de nous-mêmes.
resolverse
Certains, on peut les
con
résoudre
acero,
avec du béton, de l'acier.
con la tierra.
D'autres, on peut les résoudre avec de la terre et à l'aide de l'innovation naturelle.
Cuando nos giramos hacia la
Lorsque
naturaleza para
nous
encontrar
tournons vers la
soluciones,
nature pour rechercher des solutions,
nos encontramos a nosotros.
nous trouvons
Nosotros no nos
nous-mêmes.
podemos separar de
Nous
la
retrouvons, nous
naturaleza.
sommes inséparables de la nature.
Tenemos sed.
Lorsque nous avons soif,
La naturaleza filtra
la nature
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I would like to warmly welcome participants from all over the world to this high-level IUCN event on nature-based recovery. My name is Luc Bas, and I'm the European Regional Director for IUCN and your moderator for today. For too long, nature and biodiversity have been sidelined to prioritize national and global economic growth agendas. At best, it was considered simply nice to have, at worst, an obstacle to development. However, nature is essential for human well-being, for good quality of life, and it ultimately underpins our entire economy. It's really now the time to get stronger recognition for biodiversity loss, which is equally threatening our well-being as climate changes. It's in our hands to stop and reverse this. The rhetorical nature protection and restoration has reached a higher level recently, including different calls from political leaders at the World Economic Forum. But now it's time for real action. In the last years, some progress has been made to the acknowledgement of the services that ecosystems provide. And the recent Dasgupta report and the economics of biodiversity have again illustrated this clearly. We need to put nature back at the center of the development agenda, and scaling up nature-based solutions is really going to be key to do so. As we look to economic and social recovery from the pandemic, we must understand the ways to build back better with nature, and that's what this event today is about. I'm delighted to have some world leaders with us to discuss how we can better work with nature to respond to the current planetary emergency that we're facing. In today's earlier high-level session, we had inspirational interventions from Portugal, from China, from Egypt, and South Africa, and I want again to thank those ministers for their important contributions. In this session, we will hear from the following speakers. I will briefly introduce you and then go to our first hosting introductory remarks from our Director General, Bruno Oberle. We will hear from Dr. Andrea Meza, Minister of the Environment and Energy in Costa Rica, from Mr. Gabriel Quijandría, the Minister for Environment in Peru, from Mr. Nureddin Inamov, who is the Director of the Department of International Cooperation at the Russian Federation, and from Mr. Amadou Lamine Guizé, Deputy Minister for Environment and Sustainable Development in Senegal. After the introductory remarks of our speakers, we will take a few questions for them to answer. And again, I would like to urge all speakers to keep to the time that we've allocated so everybody can have their interventions completed within this hour that is available to us. So first, let me introduce our Director General, Dr. Bruno Oberle, who will give us some opening remarks. Bruno joined IUCN last year and has a background in sustainable resource management and green economy, and he served as the State Secretary for the Environment in Switzerland. He had a key role in the establishment of the Global Environment Facility and the Green Climate Fund. Over to you, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Luc. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, in the words of the UN Secretary General, humanity is waging war on nature, and this is a suicide. Biodiversity, the variety that sustains life on Earth, is declining at rates never experienced before in human history. In addition, climate change is affecting ecosystems and the livelihood of millions of people worldwide. Natural catastrophes are becoming more frequent and more intense. Added to this, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has caused immense suffering. It has compromised health care systems and caused nearly 2.5 million deaths worldwide. It has destroyed economies and jobs, exacerbated poverty, and ultimately evidence our broken relationship with nature. Now we have the occasion, we must build back better and greener. The decision that will be taken now regarding how the world will recover from the pandemic will impact our future for decades to come. Many governments recognize this and must be applauded for integrating the environment into their stimulus packages. However, we know from deeper analysis of these stimulus plans that biodiversity and much of nature have been forgotten. Most of the foreseen investment only focus on reducing carbon emissions, which is particularly dangerous when the crisis of biodiversity loss is so closely intertwined with the climate change crisis, and when ignoring one means that we risk failing to solve both. The Dasgupta review, launched last month, states, the solution starts with understanding and accepting a simple truth. Our economies are embedded without nature, not external to it. This nature encompasses the atmosphere, the forests, the oceans, and the entire natural world. We must do everything in our reach to shift our societies, economies, production and consumption patterns to a development model that not only invests, but also integrates nature at its core, and so ensures a sustainable future for all. We know that recovery investment can simultaneously address the COVID-19 crisis by involving public health, job security, and fiscal stability, and also enhance natural sustainability by investing in nature and nature-based solutions at scale. That is why I have launched the Nature-Based Recovery Initiative, a IUCN initiative that aims to ensure at least 10% and, if possible, up to 30% of overall investments in stimulus packages are channeled to nature, nature-based solution, and to intervention that add value to nature. What does this mean? As you will hear today and tomorrow, we must invest in nature-based solutions that safeguard and maintain ecosystems. The solution protect our food and water supplies, keep us safe against natural disaster, and provide goods and services key to human well-being and economic development. Widespread investment in nature offers quick and highly attractive returns for all. For example, planting trees or restoring floodplains are labor-intensive tasks that fit very well in the public employment programs of stimulus packages. In Europe, the Natura 2000 network of protected areas already supports 4.4 million jobs, while providing services and benefits worth more than $300 billion per year. For developing and emerging economies that rely to a great extent on nature for income and livelihood, a nature-based recovery becomes very attractive. For instance, nearly a third of the GDP of India or Indonesia is generated by nature-dependent sectors like agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. A green recovery is an opportunity to improve food and water security and to create resilient rural economies through the large-scale adoption of agricultural practices that help communities and the ecosystem around them. Nature-based solutions focus on protecting people. That is why integrating them as a central part of the world's post-COVID recovery stimulus plans not only makes sense economically, but it also easily accepted across the political spectrum. IUCN with those analyze a range of measures that stimulate economic activity, conserve nature and foster sustainable development. This catalog of nature-positive intervention shall support decision makers worldwide in adopting these measures. This will be guided by tools such as the IUCN Nature-Based Solutions Standard, which you will learn more about over the next 2 days. Importantly, to make sure this investment continue after the pandemic, we have already started working with many of you on the Finance for Nature IUCN initiative, aiming to mainstream investment flows that internalize nature-related risk, ensuring that we can fund the growth of natural capital. Ultimately, a nature-based recovery is smart, cost-effective, creates jobs, and crucially, safeguards us against future pandemics. I therefore invite you to join us in our efforts. In particular, I see 3 essential areas of work where we can collectively move forward. First, further promote the socioeconomic benefits of investing in nature. Second, encourage the creation of policies and regulatory frameworks that integrate nature at their heart. And third, politically advocate for the adoption nature-based solution at all levels. 2021 is ripe with opportunities for us all to work together on this. Through the IUCN World Conservation Congress, the convene COP that adopts an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and the Glasgow Climate Summit. Among others, we will forge a post-pandemic path where economic recovery and environmental sustainability are one and the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for this good and great scene setter. And without further ado, we're going to now listen to what this really means concretely at the national level and in the international cooperation of our leaders that will speak now. So next we have Minister Andrea Meta, the Minister for Environment and Energy in Costa Rica, who has more than 20 years experience in public policy and project execution and has worked in more than 15 countries in Latin America with diverse multilateral organizations and with national governments. So over to you, Ms. Meta.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased of being here. Thank you for the invitation. And I will just take one of the messages that we were hearing from our previous speaker. We have to do this political advocate to protect nature. And this is basically what we are doing also with the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. This was formed as a science-based coalition in response to many studies by scientists that showed the need to urgently expand our protected and conserved areas to at least 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030 if we want to curb biodiversity loss. And this is absolutely a critical element that we must enhance. And for this reason, Costa Rica, together with France as co-chairs and with the UK as ocean co-chairs, we are promoting the Hack for Nature and People with the support of over 70 cross-regional countries. And some of the leaders, like Minister Quijandría, are also part of this effort. The main goal of the coalition is to reach an agreement at the CBD COP15. And I will say why. Why are we promoting this concrete goal? And we know that this is not the only way to address this complex problem. But we are also having these political interactions and saying, in the same way that we had the 1.5 in the Paris goal, we really need to have a concrete number in this other negotiation. And this is why we put the 30 by 30 goal as a central element of these negotiations that we will be having in Kunming, because we know that protecting at least 30% of the planet's land and ocean is a win for biodiversity, is a win for climate, and it's a win to prevent pandemics as well. We also are hearing from the different studies that conserving this 30% and in a strategic locations could safeguard 500 gigatons of carbon stored in vegetation and soils, but can also safeguard the livelihoods of plenty of local communities and indigenous communities all around the world. And this is what it's all about. We are talking about the 2030 agenda as well. We're talking about these reconstruction times and plans, and we are advocating to put nature in the central of all of these plans as well. So we are having and creating this movement at the international level. We are also having conversations with the different countries and seeing, and also at the national level. In the case of Costa Rica, we know that we really need to increase our protected areas in the ocean part. And this is the commitment. We are working to increase, to move from less than 3% of protected areas in the marine part in the ocean to the 30% protected with no takes areas. And we are doing this because we know that it is a critical time, and this must be also part of our recovery plan. So I will leave it here, Luke, by now, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for this clear commitment to the international cooperation, and of course also proving it with action at the national level, which I think is often where the biggest challenge is in these international calls, that we have to see that also translate into some credible action at the national level, and we see that from Costa Rica for sure. So thank you for that. With that, I'm going to hand over now to Minister Gabriel Quijandría, Minister for Environment in Peru. And he's a recognized professional in environmental management for more than 20 years and has been formulating and implementing and evaluating environmental policies for all that time. To the international I believe that Mr. Quijandría is going to share some slides with us at the national level, which I think is often good, and where the biggest challenges in these international calls that we have to see that also translate into some.
Merci beaucoup, Luc.
Thank you very much, Luc.
Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Bonjour, bonsoir a tous. Muchas gracias a IUCN por la invitación para
Thank you very much to IUCN for the invitation to support you in this dialogue. The idea of being able to deploy the power of nature as an ally to generate a dynamic in economic recovery and to reconstruct employment for us in Peru is something that we have been putting a lot of impetus into. It entails an array of challenges that are up on my slide here. For instance, the need to combine various different visions and variables, which very often are dealt with from isolated knowledge communities. And in this case, nature-based solutions, what we need to have is to think outside of the box, as we often are told. So how can we make sure, for instance, that a supplier of drinking water can work comfortably with people who, for instance, work in fisheries production or a sustainable livestock in the water basin from where they draw their water. And that's no mean feat. It makes things very complicated, and it really results in a major challenge to get out of silos and to change paradigms to find nature-based solutions. So this additional effort is really worth it, though. As we've just heard from Minister Mesa, in the last few months, we have had the possibility of really seeing tough evidence from scientific studies around the world that show that investing in recovery, conservation, sustainable use or recovery of ecosystems and related ecosystem services is a profitable investment, and very often more profitable than investments that are often presented as really driving development. So I think we need to work as a community, as a conservation community, to mainstream this nature-based solution perspective as part of the development dialogue, and not just the dialogue, but rather the implementation of development. Incorporating nature-based solutions is complementary and often enhances infrastructure, as well as social assistance projects and economic assistance projects. And we need to be very clear about that, because otherwise, if we don't factor these aspects in, we already have seen from many experiences the loss of useful life because of soil erosion, just to give one example. And not knowing the role of nature in these processes is something that proves very expensive, more expensive indeed than an initial investment to provide nature-based solutions. And again, as I've said, this means that all stakeholders have to be flexible to work in differing communities and to be able to build different approaches. It's a great challenge, linked, for instance, to driving nature-based solutions. We have the role of the private sector. How can we engage the private sector in these processes actively? How can we make sure that they acknowledge that restoration and recovery can be turned into an ecological and environmental benefit and social benefit, but also in long term that it will provide a visible economic return, perhaps not immediately, but certainly further down the line. So if we have the right approach, this can all happen. Our second challenge has to do with scalability. I'm not hugely familiar with other experiences in the rest of the world, but in Latin America, we have small, very successful experiences that we sometimes struggle to mainstream or to scale them up into general public policies. Costa Rica has shown us interesting examples. Mexico also with its environmental services, but this is usually a major challenge. How do we move from a small scale successful experiences of an NGO, for example, in a specific place to scaling it up to a national program? Thank you very much. Thank you, Gabriel.
Collaboration opportunities and breaking away the silos, which has been a problem to get nature integrated for quite some time now. With that great second intervention, I'm going to hand over now to our colleague from the Russian Federation, Mr. Nuridin Inamov. He's representing Minister Kozlov, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. And Mr. Inamov is the director of the Department for International Cooperation and board member of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment in the Russian Federation. So over to you, Mr. Inamov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Excellencies, Honorable Secretary General, dear colleagues, on behalf of Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of Russia, Mr. Alexander Kozlov, first of all, I'm extending gratitude for the invitation to participate in this meeting of IUCN, and I wish you and your beloved ones to stay safe and healthy in these difficult times. We are grateful that such a meeting is taking place now on the eve of the COP15 and the new Global Biodiversity Framework Program. I think that the issues which are put on the agenda are relevant to the policies at the national and international level. In this regard, seconding the opening remarks by Secretary General Bruno Oberle, let me start from introducing the activities of the Russian Federation in the field of environment. First of all, it is the project-based approach which is being now introduced by the Russian government, where we have the national project which is called Ecologia, which encompasses all the fields of the environment and nature protection, including the biodiversity, protected areas, water resources, waste management, etc. Let me shorten it to the area or to the issue of protected areas. Now, in Russia, we have more than 13,000 protected areas of different level, including the national or federal level, regional and local level protected areas, which are by area almost 256 million hectares, or 13.5 of the country territory, including 21 million hectares of the marine protected areas, which is equal to 3% of the territorial waters of the Russian Federation. And we are planning in the coming decade to increase the area to reach up to 17%. And if we calculate also the protected areas of other different types, we think that we can reach the identified targets of 30% until 2030. We are using the protected areas also to increase the protective measures of the flagship biodiversity species, such as moor tiger, forest leopard, snow leopard, and Persian leopard, etc. Definitely, we are interested in further increasing the international cooperation in this area within the IUCN and other international organizations and conventions. Also, we are now developing the environmental tourism or ecotourism because guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, we are planning to increase the involvement of the local and indigenous people activities in the environmental tourism development, because we are planning to increase manifold the number of the tourists who are participating in the protected. One of the best examples, maybe it is Kenozra National Park in Arkhangelsk area in the Russian north, when we can see combination of the protected area, historical part, and the international cooperation. And thus is equal to 47 other biodiversity reservoirs under the UNESCO. Forestry is another topic, and in this regard, we are actively engaged in the UN Decade on the ecosystem restoration. And in the forestry, we are setting up the rules that the number of the forest cut should be equal or even more trees planted to restore the forest. And in this regard, I think that very interesting issue is also the engagement of the volunteers. For example, in our national program, Let's Protect the Forest in 2020, we have 40 million trees planted, with millions of people participating in it. Another project is the Garden of Memory, in the memory of the victims of the Second World War, 27 million Soviet people lost their lives. So 27 million trees should be planted also to restore this. In brief, also, I'm looking into the time. I think that among the proposals which I propose is to practice the holistic approach, combining the climate change, biodiversity protection, water resources management, so that the issue of the nature-based solutions will work. Second is the interaction with other international organizations. Like, for example, yesterday we have the working group on biodiversity with OECD. When we are talking about the ecosystem services, the issue of the payment for ecosystem services may be also interacted with the OECD potential of the economic and social aspects.
Thank you, Mr. Inamov. I'm going to have to stop you here, but we will come back to you later with a question. Thanks for that impressive list of achievements already and of commitments. And listening to this, and I have not done my research properly maybe, or I've just now been informed that Russia is not part of the high-level ambition coalition yet. And I think you have all cards in hand to really consider this. And I'm sure that Minister Mesa and Kichandria would be very happy to welcome you to that coalition.
Thank you for the proposal. We'll consider it. Thank you.
Yes, it would be great. I'm going to hand over now to Mr. Amadou Lamine Guizé. He is the Deputy Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development in Senegal. He has been appointed in 2017, but he also served as a Deputy Governor to the Kolda and the Thiès regions between 2008 and 2013, and he's Vice President of the Global Green Growth Institute in Senegal. À vous, Monsieur Lamine Guizé.
You have the floor, sir.
Merci, Mesdames, Messieurs. Je me nomme Amadou Lamine Guissé.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Amadou Lamine Guissé, Secretary General of the Ministry for the Environment and Development in Senegal. It's our pleasure to share with you certain of our experiences from Senegal today, experiences to improve the economic and social situation of our population in Senegal in the context of the Great Green Wall. So it's a pleasure to share with you this presentation on two subjects in line with the time allotted to us on the implementation of our vision for the Great Green Wall and also on the relevance of the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of you may not know Senegal. This is a sub-Saharan country in Western Africa. We're facing up to deterioration of our natural resources due to climate change. This has led to the setting up of a pan-African program called the Great Green Wall from Dakar to Djibouti, some 8,000 kilometers. This was set up by heads of state at the time of a summit held in 2005. In Senegal, some 64% of the area of our country is deteriorated. That's out of a total of 176,000 square kilometers. Since the year 2008, action has been taken by an agency set up in Senegal devoted exclusively to the Great Green Wall. 5,000 hectares have been reforested, which has meant an improvement to the environment. And we have a participational approach. We are reforesting, we are sowing woodland with appropriate and adapted species. We're trying to protect areas against forest fires. In this way, we are trying also to foster the interests of the local population. In the framework of this Senegal plan, Senegal Emerging Green Plan, that has been adopted by His Excellency, the head of state. We have this plan called Emerging Green Senegal. This enables us to devote more resources to reforestation and to combat the deforestation and speculation that otherwise takes place on such land. And we've set up a major Senegalese agency devoted exclusively to reforestation and to the Great Green Wall. And we intend to have a tremendous cooperation with other countries involving the creation of 5,000 jobs. So when it comes to sustainable development in the period after COVID, you know that COVID is a pandemic that's having a very negative effect on many of our policies. And in the area of the environment, we're trying to face this challenge in Senegal. We have set up programs to give a new fillip to the economy, which has taken a hit in Senegal. And an important proportion of this is devoted to the recuperation of our natural environment and setting up an environment that's resilient to climate change. There was a summit recently in Paris where statements were made to the effect that $14 billion would be devoted to assist Africa in the context of this Great Green Wall and similar programs. So the idea is to promote our woodlands, green technologies, and use carbon soft technologies as well. I'd like to show you a few pictures that illustrate this initiative to renew our natural resources. We have multi-purpose areas as well that involve kitchen garden activities, horticultural activities. We're trying to combat forest fires and setting up areas for foraging, as you saw on our fourth slide, where we allow our cattle to thus graze and get fed. Those are some of the ideas I wanted to share with you from Senegal. Thank you. Thank you, Amadou.
Let's now see a few questions for our panelists. There's actually quite a few nice questions coming in from the audience, and if we have time, I might just drop one to you all, which was a very smart one. But the first one I'm going to ask to Andrea, and is to elaborate a bit on the high-level coalition, which we all know of, I think, and which you have been championing with France and others. But could you maybe elaborate a bit more on how that deal can support these global and broader ambitions to reach the Sustainable Development Goals themselves, and obviously how this coalition can contribute to this green recovery? Can you elaborate a bit of 2-3 minutes to this, please?
Thank you, Lou. And it's a very interesting question. Thank you for that. I will say that learning from what we are seeing from the multilateral world, once we have like clear goals, like the ones we have in the Paris Agreement, for example, then at the national level and at the regional level, we can all contribute and move towards that global goal. And this is a little bit what we want to achieve with the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. And yes, it is, if we manage to protect this 30% of lands and ocean by 2030, we know that we will be able to maintain some concrete livelihoods. If we move to each of our countries and we start talking with the local indigenous communities and with farmers all around the different countries, we identify the importance of having protected areas, as well as the fishermen as well. And we know that creating protected areas and protecting these areas sometimes is not easy, but we can manage this with the ecosystem approach. Also having people as part of all these elements. And if we have then these international goals, then we can mainstream these international goals also in our national plans. And as Gabriel was saying, it is then easier one way or the other as ministers of environment to try to mainstream these in our development plans. So if we have these international accords and goals, then we can, as ministers of environment, and sometimes we're not the stronger minister in our countries, we have like something else to take and to try to mainstream in our development plans. And also, then we can also continue these efforts at the local level with indigenous communities and with the different stakeholders. But I think that it is critical then to understand the importance of having some pristine areas and some no-take areas all around the globe to start this destruction of nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And let me say that you are definitely strong ministers. We all hope that, of course, you will become also more powerful. That is true, because that's ultimately what is needed. And I think when the prime ministers and the presidents understand how everything is based on a healthy ecosystem, you will get alongside. And we see more and more leaders of government actually speaking out more clearly. My next question is to Gabriel. Gabriel, there is a lot of work going on in Peru, of course, and you have embarked on an ambitious target on national forest landscape restoration, something that is very dear to IUCN as well. And you're looking at restoring 3.2 million hectares of degraded land by 2020. So what are the challenges that you face to restore at the national level, and how have you worked with your subnational engagement of stakeholders? Because I think that's ultimately the local governments have a big role here. Over to you, Gabriel.
Thank you, Luke, for the question. Algunos de los temas, algunos de los retos planteados los he ya adelantado.
Well, some of the challenges that we face, I've already covered when I spoke earlier, but to supplement that, I would say there are some points linked towards what the English speakers expressed by saying making the case. How do I make the argument to convince people that nature-based solutions are technically sustainable? How do I win that argument? Because in some cases I have to compete with other proposals. I have to supplement conventional engineering proposals. And very often unfair expectations are raised. And people expect me to have as tough as cast iron figures and ambiguous figures and conventional economic figures when dealing with nature-based solutions as with other kinds of solutions. And this is a challenge. In Peru, we're working on certain cooperation programs with matters such as when you restore terracing in the hillsides, how much water do you save? So that one can specifically demonstrate that the restoration of such terraces in the hills is technically and economically viable. And in developing countries, you get all the time, you get the issue of legal security. How can I develop these technical solutions in areas where there isn't that kind of 100% legal security, where property rights or land enjoyment, land use enjoyment rights are a bit shaky, a bit unclear when it comes to operating forestry activities or mining, which does happen in Peru to a great extent in the Amazon area. we have parallel progress with granting land title to people so that they shall have a formal title and thus be able to use the land. And that's, as I say, progressing in parallel with other things, because it's very important. Otherwise, there's a terrible disincentive to investment in nature-based solutions, particularly when dealing with the private sector, as I mentioned earlier. If the private sector is not looking at some kind of legal safety, legal security about actually receiving the return on investment, then they're unlikely to even get involved. And lastly, and this happens in all areas of development, there's the matter of finance. Getting this financial sector to understand the economic logic behind these projects is a challenge too, because we're talking here about instruments that operate over a much longer time frame as an investment in comparison with other more conventional ways of placing one's funds. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And those were very clear examples.
Of course, and direct finance investments. With that, I'd like to go back to our Russian friend, Nuruddin. Russia hosts the lion's share of primary boreal forests and 1/5 of the world's timber resources. So there's a huge opportunity, especially because they play a vital role in carbon sequestration and regulating water balance on our planet. So how do you see the mainstreaming of nature-based solutions into the national strategies and plans in the near future?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. Really, it is very important. Regarding the use of nature-based solutions, we are grateful for the Paris Agreement negotiations results, where we get the inclusion of the boreal forest as the carbon sequestration natural reserves. In this regard, now we are updating our national forestry policy. Just recently, the president of Russia, Mr. Vladimir Putin, set up the decree about developing the strategy for forestry till 2030. I partially mentioned it, but also I wanted to add that we are trying to develop the forestry, and of course we have the issues maybe unfortunately common for many other forest countries, like wildfires. Also the elder forests, how they incorporate with the younger forests. That's why tree plantation is one of the parts. Second is, of course, the work against illegal logging. Unfortunately, it is the problem. And number three, and it is not only forest, I want to elaborate further on, it is the issue which is interesting for all the participants, for all the countries. The methodology of calculating the environmental services. Because just as the forest, before it was only calculated how many trees, which how many wood we can get out of the 1 hectare, etc. Now, when we are calculating the carbon sequestration, how much they can absorb, then the recreation services, etc. So these methodologies, when we calculate, it is much easier for us, the representatives of the environmental services, to show these numbers of money to the finance and economic ministries, where we can explain, honorable colleagues, this is not only wood out of the forest, but its cost and this value is much, much more. That's why it is very important. Next is, of course, the engagement of the indigenous people. Just for example, if with your permission, in the Far East of Russia, together with our partners from WWF and German partners, we introduced the Beacon project, where we agreed with the representatives of the indigenous people that they are protecting the forests in the particular area of the hectares. They're getting paid for it. Then we are calculating how much CO2 emissions can be sequestered by this area. And at the same time, we do understand that the indigenous people are using the nature-based solutions how to do better. And protecting the forests, we're also protecting the biodiversity, especially deer, which are in the food chain, are food for the Amur tigers. So it is a very holistic approach.
Okay.
We are trying to combine all it in one of the projects. And in this regard, of course, very important issue already raised, the incorporation of the private sector.
Yeah.
We developed the program within our ministry, which is called Business and Biodiversity. We know that now with the environment and climate becoming more and more part of the competition and the global markets, we are working with the companies to get their involvement in the environmental activities. We have the excellent example in the Sakhalin Island, which is called wild salmon, where the huge oil companies like ExxonMobil are engaged in the salmon protection. We have the engagement of the biggest Russian oil company, Rosneft, in the protection of the polar bear in the Arctic.
Yeah.
So this engagement of the big money with their social and environmental responsibility leads to the positive examples, and we are planning to continue this engagement because we are being supported also by the government, by the president, and of course we see the interest of the businesses.
Spasiba, Nuruddin, spasiba. It's good that you actually remind us of the accounting for natural capital that is needed to ultimately channel more investment into nature protection and restoration. It is inevitable. We will need more public finance, but we'll also need more private finance. And for that, we need to account for natural capital. And at the moment, as you described, it is only the CO2 emission reductions and the emission rights, if you like, that are being accounted for. But I think we'll have to take it to another level. And I think it's also one of the things that the coalition is aiming at, to really account for the natural capital and to have a level playing field among countries. Me as a European citizen, of course, I look very much into the EU to see if they can have such a level playing field on natural capital at the 27 member states, which would already be a good start. But globally, we will need it as well. And the private sector being, of course, of uttermost importance to collaborate. So now for a last question, I will turn to Amadou. Amadou, Senegal has been at the forefront and initiating and implementing the Great Green Wall initiative. And so I wanted to know how the government is implementing this vision to actually improve the social and economic situation of the populations and their livelihoods. And how have these approaches, which was central to the Great Green Wall, how have they been able to help in the post-COVID-19 recovery? Could you elaborate a bit on that? Merci, Amadou. À vous.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Donc, comme vous le savez,
thank you very much. As you know, and as I mentioned in my presentation, this Great Green Wall initiative has been underway in Senegal since 2008. We've set up an agency which deals exclusively with this. And because it's the wish of His Excellency, the Head of State, since 2012, major initiatives have been commenced to strengthen our forestry heritage. To do this better than in the past, and in conjunction with the Council of Ministers, the President of the Republic made a historic decision by classifying large new areas of Senegal as forests. The previous classification dated from 1968. So for 52 years, there'd been no new classification of forests and woodlands in Senegal. So 9 new forests were classified in 5 different administrative regions with an area of 88,000 hectares. And in Dakar, the capital city, 10 hectares were granted by the head of state for a park. And he also classified a wetland as a natural nature reserve. And that is now being presented as one of the Ramsar world wetlands. So our National Reforestation Agency has national competence. 14 regions are now covered by that agency. But another aspect worth underlining is that each year we have a 3-month winter campaign to replant woods and forests. Once again, all of these activities are carried out in conjunction with local populations, the local municipalities, in conjunction with technical and financial specialist companies. So in the context of the common good, Senegal has set up this program to relaunch our forestry activities. And the green aspect plays a key role within this. We are in the process of strengthening the logistic and human and technical resources to defend this part of our environment, with a program running up to 2024 in Senegal. So we have these programs. Senegal will also be launching what we call the Emerging Green Senegal program, covering education in environmental matters from kindergarten age up to university, so as to ensure that all of our school and university places can be converted into areas where the interests of the environment are vigorously defended. This goes for the country and urban areas. Interpreters regret the sound was very poor with the minister from Senegal. The interpreters do the best they can in these circumstances.
It's really important, and then seeing how that translates at a local level will really speak to the imagination of the local communities. And of course, in your country, also the indigenous peoples, as was already mentioned earlier, which is beautifully how I think there is a beautiful crossing from Peru to Costa Rica to Russia, when we see and understand the knowledge of indigenous peoples and their importance. We've reached the clock, actually, the 3 o'clock limit, which is a shame, because I think we could have definitely had a further debate, and I'm sure that each minister has a question for the other. I'm sure they have. I hope they will be in touch with each other. Unfortunately, we can't have those here now and right now. We have had a lively Q&A box when we were speaking, and I just wanted to, and this is a way of attempting to wrap up from all the great examples we saw and the wide range of examples and solutions that we've been talking about. But it's a good question from Georg Schwede. He's from the Campaign for Nature, so from an NGO. And he puts actually the right question. There is a lot of finance now, a lot of investment going into climate change action, which is mostly on energy and the hard emission reductions as we understand them. But yes, only 2% of the climate finance is currently invested in nature-based solutions. And the question he is asking, I think, is the one that I believe you've been answering partially by your examples and by your political engagement and the willingness of your governments to invest. And his question is simple: what needs to be done to have more countries to invest more into nature-based solutions to maximize the benefits, both for biodiversity, climate protection, and for people? And one more specific element he adds to it is that the One Planet Summit of beginning of the year, organized by the French president, called and aims at aligning 30% of bilateral ODA of the climate finance to NBS. So that's a clear pledge. We see it happen in those countries that are leading. We've seen leadership from your country here and your willingness to collaborate with other countries, which is amazing. As IUCN, we are grateful for your IUCN state membership and to lead the way. And that's, of course, what we hope from all our state members. And with this, I'm going to close today's session. And thank you again to Mr. Inamov, Minister Mesa, Minister Kijanderia, and Deputy Minister Lamine Guizet. Thank you so much. And we will distribute the presentations and I believe also a recording that was distributed through YouTube. Thank you so much and see you soon, I hope. Goodbye.
Thank you. And congratulations on the wonderful content and time management.
Thank you so much. And thank you for you to keep the time as well. Thank you so much.
Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.